Yes, hang on, Mag. Just going live.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are beaming to you live from Omaha Beach again. We are waiting for our second camera to come online. There's been some roadworks down there. I'm Paul Woodadge, as usual. Joining me today from Paris is Linda Hervieux from Massachusetts, but living in Paris. Hello, Linda. How are you today?
Good, Paul. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm a bit stressed, starting a bit late, but there was roadworks down there. So, and then our camera teams, we've got Mag above Omaha Beach, and we're going to have Duncan on the beach shortly to talk about the location. So this show is a little bit different in that we are following an individual soldier on Omaha Beach. It's not going to be quite talking about the landings in terms of how the battle unfolded and first wave, second wave, and tactics and getting off the beach. It's simply about one of the men who were there and what he did to save lives. All based, of course, on the incredible book by Linda, which I will hold a copy of up there, Forgotten, about the African-American, Black Americans, Omaha Beach on D-Day, and their big story and how they came into service. And Linda will be adding the detail about that. So Mag is currently above Easy Red on Omaha Beach. This is the Rookie Valley, the E1 draw. There are 5 valleys coming off Omaha Beach: D1, D3, E1, E3, and F1. So this is roughly in the middle of the beach, and it's wider than people think. It's about 5 miles from left to right. And in terms of where we are today, we're in the middle. And I'll let Linda talk in a minute, but the thing is, we're not 100% certain where the figure we're going to talk about exactly landed on Omaha Beach. You would think 76 years on, we would know all this information. The reality is there's still lots of debate. There aren't all the archives available about where landing craft came ashore, and some were swept down further east than they were east than where they were supposed to. And even all these years later, we haven't got the exact information. But Linda, I'll bring it on you. So who are we talking about today, and how did you get involved in their story?
So we're talking about Waverly Woodson. Waverly Woodson was a hero medic on Omaha Beach. He was a member of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. That is Waverly Woodson's first Army portrait, where he looks very young in that picture. He came ashore at around 9 in the morning on D-Day on June 6th. He was injured in the landing. His LCT, landing craft tank, was hit a couple times by shells. He had wounds, inner thigh, buttocks. Men around him were hit, wounded, some were killed. He was patched up. He landed on the beach and he set up a medical station along with 3 other medics. And basically, according to an Army press release that cited his heroism in August of 1944, he treated more than 200 men. He saved countless lives, and he worked through his injuries until he collapsed 30 hours later on June 7th, after saving, finally, a quartet of Tommies, British soldiers, coming in. So that
would have probably been for airfield building. And what's interesting, Linda and I were chatting when we were waiting for the cameras to go online. There were some roadworks. That's why we went a bit late, so apologies for that. But everyone's here waiting, is that the first wave medics, so the men landing at H hour, so just after 6:30 in the morning. So the men attached to the 116th, the 16th units, like A Company 116th, the Bedford boys. And there was a friend of mine called Marion Gray, who was in the 29th Division. Their task was not to stay on the beach with the wounded. In fact, they weren't to treat the wounded. They were to treat men who were moving forward with the advance. So you get a gap where the first wave casualties, the dreadful losses in those first few minutes down on Dog Green and Fox Green, the medics there, well, they were in too much of a trying situation to get set about work anyway, because it was bullets just like, falling like rain at that point there. And then they're moving on with the advances. So someone like Woodson coming ashore at about 9 a.m. in the morning, which sounds a long time in, 2.5 hours later, is actually exactly when you need that help, because at this point, you've still got lots of men piled up on the beach, lots of wounded men, and their task was not to move off the beach, but to stay there to help the wounded. So Linda, explain just briefly what unit Woodson was attached to.
So he was part of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, and the 320th was charged with raising a curtain of barrage balloons over the beaches of the American beaches, Omaha and Utah, on D-Day. As far as I can tell, that's the only known picture you're seeing right now of the 320th on Omaha Beach. As far as I can tell, they were, Waverly Woodson and the three other medics were the first African Americans on Omaha Beach or Utah Beach, and they landed in the thick of it, as you can imagine. And Waverly Woodson had, by the time I started researching my book in 2009, he had died, but he gave an accounting a few times, mostly around the 50th anniversary of D-Day, of what he had done. And a big part of my research was about the utter racism and unfair treatment, inhuman treatment that these men received, and how when they were training in Britain, it was the first time that they had been treated as full citizens. And Waverly Woodson speaks about this too. So by the time, before we even get to Omaha Beach with Waverly Woodson, I had this wonderful picture of him from his own words, also from his widow, Joanne, who's fantastic, lives in Maryland. And what we learned about Woodson was basically a story that's very emblematic of what the Black GIs, as they were universally known in Britain, what they experienced both back home and then in Britain, which was a revelation for many of them when they were treated so well, like esteemed guests, and also as equals. They were not given second class anything. They were really treated like the welcome allies that they were. And so we have Waverly Woodson coming onto Omaha Beach with this track record, with this history that he shared with, pretty much the other 1 million African Americans in World War II, of prejudice, of discrimination, of segregation. Remember, these were the American Army was segregated. So this was an all Black unit. As you see here, this is from Octeville, France in July of 1944, taken by George Davison, a clerk in the unit, and shared with me with his wonderful son, Bill, who has worked so hard to preserve the memory of his dad and these other men. And so we have Waverly Woodson on the beach. We have him working 30 hours. And then we would learn that later that he had been nominated for the Medal of Honor, the highest honor, as you know, for valor in the US. And he would not get it because no African Americans got the Medal of Honor in World War II. It wasn't until 1997, after an Army study, that Bill Clinton awarded 7 medals. Waverly Woodson was not among those men. He was considered. He didn't get it because his records are missing. And that's a very common story in World War II.
Yeah, not necessarily always true either. When they say records are missing, sometimes it's true, sometimes it just means they can't be bothered to look, doesn't it, really? I think.
Well, I looked very hard. Yeah. I looked very hard for them, and his personnel records were among the Army records, 80% of which were destroyed from World War II in a fire in 1973, and that's in an archive in St. Louis, Missouri. And so we don't have those records that would give us some clues, but we also just don't have the from other files that would be outside Washington, D.C. We just don't have those medal files, so we don't know what happened, but there is one paper that exists in the Truman Library in Missouri that says that an American general in Britain, recommended him for a higher award. And There's correspondence with the White House between the War Department in the U.S. and the White House that says that the president ought to award the medal personally to Waverly Woodson if he gets it. And of course, we know that no Black soldiers got it. So that's ongoing, as you know, Paul. So that the family and others are still hoping. So
and we'll talk about that later. So we've got Duncan on the beach now. So this is, for those watching who are not familiar with the terrain and geography of Omaha Beach, low tide was 2 and a bit hours ago today. And at 9 o'clock on June the 6th, 1944, when Woodson landed, it was about 2.5 hours out after low tide. So this is pretty much the amount of sand that would have been there on the beach when these men came ashore. However, with the beach reducing all the time, at half tide, it gets to a point where it starts coming in really quite quickly. So we're about that point now where if you're standing there, you can actually kind of see it moving in by a minute or two. Of course, Omaha Beach, some bits of it have changed quite a lot. Some of it is quite authentic. The area where Duncan is now, and the dog there is Bentley. I promised Bentley I'd give him a name shout. That's Duncan's dog, Bentley, somewhere on the beach there, having a whale of a time. But that's about the beach. Well, that's on East. There's Bentley. Good afternoon, Bentley. So that's the easy red section. Where Duncan is facing now to the east, that's towards Fox Green. And the by process of elimination, I did an email to Joe Balkowski, the incredible Omaha Beach 29th Division historian yesterday. We're not 100% certain where Woodson came ashore, but we think it's in the easy red Fox Green area somewhere from an LCT. And this is the area where Duncan is now. The shingle bank that would have been at the top of the beach has now been replaced by modern, larger rocks to stop the erosion, to stop the tide coming over the road there. And those houses there wouldn't have been there. Down further west on Dog Green and Dog White, there were houses at the time of the invasion, and they are still there today. But this particular part of the beach, there was about 2 down this section. Now there's a couple of dozen there. But that's the view that Woodson would have seen at the time. Of course, a lot more chaotic on June the 6th. I've got a couple of photos I'm going to show. I'm trying to show some slightly different ones that haven't been shown before because I've got a huge archive of Omaha Beach photos. This one I'm showing now is probably the day after, or maybe 2 days after, because you can see all the ships in the background there that are being set up for the artificial harbor. But you can still see the remains of the detriment from June the 6th, the German obstacles, the logs. There's a bit of a life belt down there. So I tried to show some ones that maybe you viewers won't have seen before, which is, and also get across the enormity of the beach. This one here is also, there's a LST in the background there. And again, you can see the obstacles there. There's a Sherman tank washed up. And there's that shingle bank in the bottom left-hand corner there. And that's, I'll let Linda talk in a minute. That's the English use of the word shingle, which means small pebbles, or in some cases, kind of fist-sized pebbles. Sometimes people from across the other side of the Atlantic get very confused about what shingle is when you are reading about it in a World War II book. Well, it's the British use of the word, meaning, beach pebbles. They've mostly been removed from Omaha Beach these days, and they removed quite simply because they were used for building material to build roads and indeed airfields and things inland. So they're all taken away, and that's why there's not much shingle left on the beach until you go right up to the west on Fox Green. And Mag, just to remind you, Mag is above the beach. So that's the Widerstands 65 there. She's got the image now of that bunker there, 50mm casemate, that at the time had a wicked view across the Easy Red and Fox Green, probably the kind of bunker that actually was firing at Woodson when he was doing his incredible work on the beach. The view it had has been overgrown now, but that would have had a vicious view down there. Where Mag is standing is also the location of that famous photo of the 2nd Division winding their way off the beach, taken the following day. But that's a bit of context. I'll put it back on Duncan's feed for a second. He's going to walk along the beach, and I'll let Linda hand over and talk about what was going on the beach and the role of the medics and what she's learned about the experiences that day, and then we'll touch on the inequality and racism a bit later on. But so from your research, what type of work was Woodson doing that day? It was way more than he'd been trained for, surely?
As we know, Omaha Beach was a bloodbath, and it was predicted to be one, and it was, in fact, one. And when you talked about the shingle, I also had a lot of trouble understanding what this shingle was, and it was thanks to Joe Belkowski, who really drew me a picture, because I could not imagine what this part of the beach looked like when he came, and how soldiers could be sheltering under this, because as we know, there were German snipers firing on them. There was small arms fire on the beach. There was every sort of hazard that greeted them. And basically what Woodson did when he set up, he had basically a tent roll, a lean-to, and he created this medical station, on the beach, which there were no medics when he landed, he says, and the other medics also said this too. And so they just kept racing in the water to pull out wounded and drowning men. And this is what Woodson did. And remember, their Red Cross brassards that were on their arms didn't protect them from those German guns. In fact, that made them a target. There were lots of medics fired on that day. It was an absolutely perilous business to be in, staying on that beach, racing in and out of the water, dragging men to safety. Safety that was, in fact, also perilous because the water was coming in, and there were parts of this beach, you can attest, that did not have much beach at all. And the officers who were coming in after were screaming at these men to keep going, to get off that beach. And what's interesting with the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, which was, for all intents and purposes, infantry until that small arms fire was cleared. They were working with the infantry, and they did exactly what all the infantry troops did when they landed on that beach, except for one key thing, which is that these men were not leaving the beach. Their jobs, including Waverly Woodson's job, was to stay on that beach. And they would stay on that beach for 140 days, protecting men and material. Some would move to the ports as the Americans moved off the beach, but a couple companies. But for the most part, these men were staying on the beach. Waverly Woodson was staying on the beach. They weren't going anywhere.
And just for the benefit of anyone who's watching this who's not sure what the balloon's purpose is, and I certainly as a tour guide have had people ask me, what are the balloons for? The balloons there's no people, they're not manned. The balloon is simply the device that holds up a cable. The cable effectively is the weapon. And if an enemy aircraft flies in and hits the cable, it slices the propeller, it slices the wing off. And the idea is, on a day of lots of cloud, you kind of winch the balloons up and hide them in cloud cover, so enemy aircraft don't want to fly into that because of the fear of hitting the cables and the balloons. And also, on a clear day, you have them at different heights, like a sort of hedgehog's prickles, to keep people away from the beach. They did briefly experiment with putting them with a flammable liquid inside, but that caused more damage to the users and operators than it did the enemy, because imagine if it breaks off its moorings or something and something ignites it, you've got a flammable balloon above your head. So they gave up that idea. But the balloons are there as anti-aircraft. The cable, just a 1/4-inch thick cable, is the weapon there. And
yeah, sorry. But they were already like little flying bombs filled with hydrogen, so they were already pretty perilous.
Yeah.
And there were quite a few accidents with the balloons in training. But these balloons that went to war were armed with bombs. So they had tiny little bomblets. They were British-designed balloons. They were not all of the barrage balloons had bombs. For example, the ones that were flying over London, for instance, that were larger, that were intended to cover a larger area. Those did not, but these balloons that went to war had those little bomblets on them. And the idea was that when, imagine the balloon and a cable, and if a plane hit the cable, it would get caught in the wire a bomb would detach, and a good hit could blow a wing, maybe
Yeah,
the gas
yeah,
tank.
exactly.
So it was quite something. And what's notable is the balloons had a trial in Italy for the Italian landing, and they were deemed such a success that that's why they were then brought into the D-Day operation. So.
In many ways, it works on a psychological basis. The German pilots, by this point, most of the ones left in normally would have been fairly experienced, and they'd have fought over other battlefields, and you just don't want to fly your aircraft in near where these things are because of the danger. So they work in many ways just on that fear factor. Because if I remember correctly, the 320th had only one confirmed kill. I think it was a Junkers 88 in the Normandy campaign, which doesn't indicate they're not doing their job. It indicates they are very much doing their job well because the German aircraft are keeping away. If they fly in, that means they're going to be used. But the point is they work by keeping the German aircraft away. So the beach there, I should also point out that the reason there were these extra medics on the beach is somewhat shrouded in a little bit of mystery, and that the last few days before D-Day, or possibly weeks, they were predicting some possibly, as Linda said, some increased casualties, and they basically borrowed all the medics from the 6th Engineer Brigade and the 5th Engineer Brigade on Utah and Omaha. And these are medics attached to quartermaster companies, and ordnance companies, and truck driving companies. And they basically attach these medics, spread them out in extra landing craft and LCTs on D-Day, so there would be a greater percentage of medics there on the beaches when they were needed. And it's why there aren't exact records of who was put where, because it was fairly last minute. And we're glad they were these extra medics because, of course, they were absolutely needed on not just on Omaha, but the other beaches as well. You can never have too many medics. So I remind you then, that is still half tide at a really big low tide. When the coefficient is right, you can have as much as 500 to 600 yards of sand on Omaha Beach. And that Duncan is showing us there part of one of the D-Day relics. These things come in and out of the water depending on what the beach is doing. Sometimes you can see them there for a few weeks, then they'll disappear again, then they'll uncover again depending on where the sandbars are. And these are from things like the Rhino concrete platforms, the hollow concrete they towed vehicles on, some of the remains of various landing ships, and they sit there on the beach. That's about the clearest I've seen them for a long time. Must have been to do with the way the tide's been working. I might put Duncan's microphone on. Duncan, you there, buddy?
Hi, Paul. Yes. LCT.
Yeah,
LCT.
There's a lot of they're very visible today, aren't they?
Absolutely. This is the best I've ever seen it.
Yeah,
I've always seen the buoy down here, but yeah, this is absolutely superb. You can see the skeleton of the floor plan of the LCT.
Well, we do know.
Absolutely amazing.
Earlier, Woodson's LCT was hit by hit a mine on the beach on D-Day, and I'm not saying that is the LCT he was in, but it is one of them. There were several were lost on Omaha Beach, but I've lived in Normandy for over 15 years. Duncan has too. That's the best I've ever seen it. Incredible.
I've never seen that. I've never been there to see that. So that's incredible. I'm very impressed by that. Good job.
I mean, literally,
Duncan.
it might be back next week, and that'll be covered up because, you know, when you walk out in the sand, you assume that sand is in exactly the same place it was the day before. And the reality is, of course, it might be 6 foot higher or 6 foot lower. Omaha Beach has a 21 feet vertical tide, so the beach goes up over quite a long way. So clearly, I mean, we're coming up for the spring, the autumn tides, aren't we, Duncan? That can't be far away, can it? A couple of weeks, I reckon.
No.
You're the diver.
Yeah, a couple of weeks away.
So I guess that's it. It must be just the right equinox and the right time. Well, that's amazing. That's why we bring these things to you. That's why I could have just had Linda on talking to as a formal interview, but we've got you down there on the beach, and that's some amazing footage there. While you're looking at that, I'll put Mag back on because Mag is in front of a bunker. I say I'll put Mag on. I can't get Mag's signal in strong enough. No, I'll put it back on Duncan then.
I just want to give you the size of the sheer size of this LST. So if I come to the front of the wreck, this, looking at the floor plan here, would have been where the doors would have opened. Let me just go back a bit more. So there we go. Look at the size of that. Yeah. You know, you would have got 6 Shermans in there, no problem at all. 2 rows of 3. Look at that. That is absolutely
brilliant.
superb.
I'm really thrilled by that, and we've got some wow comments on YouTube. People enjoying that, so that's good. So I think I have now got Mag's feed again now. So Mag is in front of I say that Mag's feed's still not strong enough to actually beam it, but I can't use you, Mag, at the moment. Sorry, but we'll carry with Duncan. And so, yeah, your research, Linda, into what Woodson was dealing with. I mean, we're talking. There was amputations. There was it's not just cleaning wounds. It's everything, isn't it?
Yeah, he was pulling out bullets. He said he patched wounds. As you said, amputated a right foot. He was dispensing blood plasma. And this was relentless. And, you know, when you hear the accounts of the men who were on this beach on June 6th and the night of June 6th, it was relentless noise, even all night long. You know, it was just noise and shouting of men. Woodson was haunted by the cries of the men he treated, men just screaming, "Doc, Doc, help me." You can just imagine the horror show, especially, you know, he was very seriously wounded. He would go to a hospital ship the next day. He would ask later to be sent back, you know, to the beach. It was as horrific as it could possibly be. And all of these medics survived, you know, and here's his later Army picture. He really grew up in his time. You know, he signed up, he didn't wait for a draft notice. He signed up and he joined the Army in, when was it? 1942, December 15th, 1942, he enlisted. He was a medical student at Pennsylvania's Lincoln University. And, you know, he trained as an officer. And then there were not officer positions available because Black soldiers were subject to quotas. Also the rule that they could not lead white officers junior to them. And so he retrained as a medic with the 320th. And at the time, he was Sergeant Woodson. Then he became Corporal Woodson. So.
And we specify the role of medics was really assistance for surgeons to come along later. They really weren't supposed to be doing the kind of work they did. I mean, I wrote a book about two medics, as people watching this know, up in 101st Airborne, 501st Bob Wright and Ken Moore, and they are trained to be assistants to surgeons. They know how to patch up and clean, but they ended up, of course, on D-Day doing way more than that. And that is a testament to the fact they were well trained and eager, or keen to go beyond. And, you know, when there's a man there screaming and he needs your help, you do whatever you can. It's like the administering of morphine. I know medics who were giving more morphine than perhaps they should have, because the guy was going to die anyway, and you might as well ease his suffering a little bit by giving him perhaps more than he should have. But it's human compassion. You want to help that individual there and ease his suffering. So beautiful skies down there today, guys. It's lovely down there. And of course, for those watching, we'll be back there again. Duncan and Mag will be back on Omaha Beach. That's midnight 30, so it's technically tomorrow, for the story of Operation Aquatint. So we'll be further west on the beach, but we'll be back here with us tonight for our second show today. But I'm enjoying what we're learning today, and that shot of the LCT, the wrecked LCT, was amazing, Duncan. So that's fantastic for that. So, Linda, let's bring it up to date with what's been happening with regards to this campaign to have the medal upgraded. It's been a busy week. What's been going on?
Yeah, so it's been a busy week. So shortly after my book came out, which was in the fall of 2015 in the US, a year later in Britain, at that time, Congressman Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who's now a senator, appealed to the Army. That's the British cover. The American cover is behind me on the background. He appealed to the Army to reconsider the based on what I found at the Truman Library. The memo, the paperwork that I found was also found by a team of Army researchers who in 1995, they were independent researchers, and they were commissioned by the Army to find out why no Black soldiers were given the Medal of Honor. In their book, which you can see here, I mean, it's a study that's now a book. This study showed us that Black soldiers were not only denied the opportunities they deserved, but also the decorations they deserved. And because there was such, the Army at this time was racist to its core. And by that, I mean that not only did we have segregated units, but we had a concerted effort in Army papers, in Army studies, pseudoscience, really. I mean, these were not scientific studies that were designed to demean the Black soldier, which said that his brain was smaller than that of a white man, that he could not think clearly, he could not lead, he could not take responsibility the way that a white soldier could. And the reason for this campaign to discredit the Black soldier was the Army wanted to relegate Black soldiers as much as possible to labor and service battalions. And so they had to make the case. A lot of these soldiers had been in combat, had been in since, you know, the founding of the U.S. Black soldiers had distinguished themselves. The Civil War, there were 25 medals of honor given to Black soldiers in the Civil War. When the Medal of Honor, that's when we started having a Medal of Honor. And so that's a long way of answering your question, but we have this history, and so given that history, given what I mentioned, the paperwork at the Truman Library, which was a handwritten note saying that Waverly Woodson had been considered for the Medal of Honor, stapled to this, I didn't name Waverly Woodson, it said a Black medic from Philadelphia. Stapled to it was the Army press release from August of 1944 praising Woodson. Woodson was from Philadelphia. We know that it's Woodson. So Congressman Van Hollen appealed to the Army. The Army does not like to set precedents. You can understand that. But the problem is the Army said, because we can't find his records, we cannot, you know, they weren't going to reconsider the Medal of Honor request. They also have a requirement that there be a first person witness account. This has been achieved in other old Medal of Honor cases, such as a sergeant from World War I named Henry Johnson, by finding interviews with the men who were with the particular subject of the honor campaign at the time. And so as far as we know, we don't have that kind of evidence for Waverly Woodson, but what we have is a lot more. We have the Army's own press release, which is so unusual to issue a press release, especially for an individual soldier, especially for a Black soldier. I did not find many of these at all. I mean, it's really uncanny. And we also know that Waverly Woodson was a huge star at the time. He was written up by Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. The Black press called him #1 D-Day hero and started campaigning for the Medal of Honor for him. We have a lot of proof. And so that's the background. The Army does a couple passes, inevitably rejects it, and now Senator Van Hollen teamed up with another senator, a Republican, Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania, and 2 representatives from Maryland in Congress, and they have introduced this week a bipartisan bill in the House and the Senate calling on the White House to award the Medal of Honor. So they're essentially sidestepping the Army. And I don't believe that has ever been tried. And we are actually quite optimistic because it's gotten a ton of coverage. And the Washington Post reporter tweeted that the White House is inclined to approve it. That's all I know about that is her tweet, but I was quite taken aback by that. So
well,
yeah.
I mean, thank you for your work. You've been involved in this because it's an amazing story. I mean, I remember Harley Reynolds, who was in the 16th Infantry, and he landed on the section of the beach that Duncan is on now, and he wrote up his account shortly after when he was wounded and treated, and many of his friends were wounded and treated. And when he wrote up his account and he first saw it, and I forget which Army newspaper it was, they had taken out the fact he had mentioned he was saved by a Black medic, and they just changed it to medic. So his account was edited by someone higher up to just remove the word Black. And he didn't really give it much thought, really. He just thought it was just someone editing it. But then later on, he thought, yeah, I wonder why they did that. And it does suggest there is a conscious effort to actually belittle and demean, which is it's just shocking now. I mean, to think of it, you know, these years later. But yeah, it makes sense that they were just trying to do their best. And I wanted to point as well, when you talked about the fact that they had a much better welcome in Britain, which of course the black troops did. That's not to say that Britain hadn't got its own race problems. It's that in a sense ours came later. In World War II, we didn't really have enough black people in the country to have been noticed enough for racism to start, if that makes any sense at all to the viewer. Our problems come 15, 20 years later, during the period when we're actively inviting people to come over from the Caribbean and Africa to take on the jobs that we didn't want to do ourselves. And you get a lot more black people in Britain, and then kind of the racism starts and hasn't gone away. So yes, it just seems to me that Woodson timed his years in Britain when racism hadn't started there, or there'd been racism in the past. It was a good period to be black in Britain in the 40s, not so good 20 years later.
Well, remember one thing too, you had a lot of colonial troops coming over to fight with the British services, and you had a very active campaign by the British government telling people, these are British subjects. These are British subjects. They deserve respect. They are helping us. And you had the public and the British press squarely behind them. And we saw this in Britain also when there were many episodes of Americans, white Americans, mistreating Black Americans. And I detail them in the Britain chapter in my book. Yep. And what we saw time and time again was the British public, British churches, British pastors, and also the British press coming to the defense of African Americans during the war who were unfairly accused of crimes and all kinds of other things by the American army. And one more thing that was very notable is the Foreign Office had insisted that any courts-martial, any proceedings against American soldiers that involved British civilians had to be open to the public. And that also held the Americans accountable. And that's fascinating because we saw, especially in the case of, one poor Black American soldier in Bath who was really unfairly and quite wrongly accused of rape. He would have been executed if that trial hadn't been opened up and the British public hadn't gone absolutely crazy because the facts were so clear that he had not committed that crime. Yeah. So, and there was a lot of pressure on Eisenhower to pardon him, which he did. And, and to also, Eisenhower knew that the British people would not support the Black troops being treated differently than the white troops. And so they were very aware of that.
So Duncan he's moved further down the beach. He's now actually almost not quite under, but you can see the American cemetery where you are. That's up behind the dark trees up there. So we're, we're fully on the easy red sector, Fox Green further down there. And that is, of course, where the 9,386 Americans who were not repatriated from the Normandy campaign are buried. The other 2/3 were repatriated back to the USA. And we'll be bringing this stream to an end fairly soon because we're trying to keep some shorter ones going so that people don't have to endure us talking for 2 hours as some of our streamers have gone on to. And I want to show a photo that kind of sums up things with what we're talking about. This is a photo way further down the beach of the west. This is Dog White sector. And there are a couple of barrage balloons, which would have been raised in the, as we know, by units like the 320th. And there is the temporary cemetery that was established just on June itself. You can see that they're not even crosses. They're still just wooden stakes. And this is where the men who were killed in those first few hours were buried, or some of them are buried. And that cemetery was closed down 2 or 3 days after D-Day because it wasn't very good for morale. Men coming ashore, imagine coming ashore from an LST here 2 days later and you step ashore to see all the guys who died 2 days early. It wasn't very good for morale. So all those burials there were moved up to the cemetery that we now know that Duncan is below, up on the hill, now the Colville Cemetery. And you can see the American flag flying there at half mast. And you can tell it's a couple of days after D-Day because they're beginning the work on the artificial harbor, Mulberry A there. And I think that's kind of a nice image to sort of begin to end up with the fact that, yes, Woodson did an incredible job. So too did lots of medics, but in the region of about 900 Americans lost their lives in Omaha Beach, and between 3,000 and 5,000 wounded. And in total, about 10,000 men killed and wounded on Omaha on June the 6th over the 5 beaches. So it was a terrible day. Although, of course, we did get our boots into Europe. The landing was ultimately very successful. We are beginning our campaign to liberate Europe, but it was tough fought and the costs were high. So anything else you'd like to say about the campaign, the medal campaign, anything that people could do watching to help? Is there anything they can sign up?
I will tell you, one thing to mention about that cemetery is it was African-American soldiers who dug those graves. Yeah. So those, by the end of D-Day, there were 2,000 Black troops on the beaches, and they were charged with all those kinds of jobs. So they dug those graves. And when you read the accounts of this, it was so traumatizing to be the ones burying so many bodies. And you can imagine how that hit them. So well, what I would say, if Americans are watching this, who are to definitely tell your representative, tell your senators to support this bill. It's a hard one not to support, I think. But you never know. And also there is a petition, and my website, which is my name.
Link below. Don't worry, it's on
the link. Has a link to a petition on the right-hand side. The left-hand side of my site. You'll see Waverly Woodson's picture, and it has a link to the petition started by the family. I don't believe you can sign the petition if you are not in the U.S. But anybody who can sign the petition, that just is great. It's really, it takes 2 seconds. It's a few clicks. And I know the family would really appreciate that. We've had a lot of support for this. And so a lot of school children have gotten behind it, even school children in India, where that was wow. the last group to contact me. We're very optimistic. This is the first time.
If it happens, it's going to do a wonders, isn't it? Because it's not just going to be and celebrate. It's going to open the door for other people to say, yes, let's talk about other people who are unjustly treated. Because it's not just the Black Americans. Of course, we could extend that to Jewish Americans and Polacks and Hispanic. The racism was rife. And you look at the medal allocation to units like the 1st Division, the 82nd and 101st, you see lots of kind of white, freckly country boys. The army didn't seem to like to give medals to the non mum's apple pie kind of individuals. Same in the British Army. So lots of officers got medals, perhaps not as many enlisted men. There was classism in the British Army. But anyway, we'll bring things to a halt fairly soon, because we will. And I'll put it on Duncan's view. So that Duncan is just off the beach now, off Easyware. That's the Rook A draw. That's the E1 draw. And that's the bunker that Mag was above. Mag, so Mag is, where are you, Mag? You are, I can't see where you are, Mag. Oh, you are in front of the monument. Okay. I've lost your feed again, Mag. There's a monument there to the 2nd Division. And of course, if you come to the beach, to Omaha Beach when travel begins again, there are monuments listing some of the units that aren't associated with the first wave. Yes, there are monuments to the 1st Division, 29th, but you do see the Engineer Brigade and this Quartermaster units and the camouflage battalions and the port supply units. They are memorialized as well. So you can understand that the landing is all about a huge force of men coming, some of whom are infantrymen carrying weapons, and others are men who are carrying first aid kits to do their job. So, well, I think we'll end things now. There's not been any questions come in. There's been some nice comments about the fact that, as you were saying, Linda, African Americans were decorated in the Civil War and earlier wars, and the Buffalo Soldiers. It seems to be World War II where things went a bit.
World War I as well.
World War I as well, yeah. So
the campaign to discredit began extensively in World War I. So
yeah, so there's more information we can find out about this, but I think we'll end things off now. And so the link to Linda's website is in the description on YouTube. You can get links to Duncan and Mag's website if you want to come and do a tour as well. And in terms of our next show, yeah, so join me again at 12:30. So that's tomorrow morning, very early. They'll be back on the beach in the pitch black to tell you this story about Operation Aquatint, which is a British commando raid onto the same beach 2 years earlier. And we'll hear all about that this afternoon. Please think about clicking on the Patreon link as well to find out about how you can help World War II TV. But it remains for me to say thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Mag, for doing your camera work today. Thank you, Bentley. I better get Bentley in another name check. Thumbs up for Mag. And thank you, Linda. I mean, it's an important story, and I urge people who are watching this, if you haven't already got a copy of Linda's book, just definitely get it. It's very insightful into the conditions and the times, and you'll find yourself, as I do, tutting and shaking your head at just how ridiculous things were back then, how unfair they were, and you kind of go, oh really, and it's also a very uplifting book about how these people came through it and how the bonds they had. So it's just definitely worth reading. Yeah, you can find it in your usual bookstore. So I'll end things now and say thank you very much for watching this. I've enjoyed it, and we'll come back and see you again on World War II TV soon.
thank you.